My mother kept this trunk locked for 37 years, I said aloud, staring at the cracked leather and tarnished brass corners. Last month, while I stood empty-handed, my sisters divided $16 million worth of jewelry without a second thought. The trunk goes to Daniel, Evelyn declared, her lips curling with that practiced smirk. Claire laughed, clutching diamond bracelets like toys. They swept out of the house with their fortune, leaving me alone with what they believed was worthless. When the lock finally gave way, my hand shook. Inside wasn't gold or jewels, but a stack of envelopes, each one addressed to me, untouched, yellowed with age. I tore open the first. The words blurred as my knees buckled. Dear Daniel, if you're reading this, Margaret is gone, and it's time you learned the truth. You were stolen from us when you were 5 years old. For 42 years, I've been Daniel Foster, a middle school music teacher in Connecticut. My students call me Mr. Foster, or sometimes just Mr. F. Parents thank me for my patience as their kids squeak out hot cross buns on recorders. It isn't glamorous. It isn't wealth. But it was mine, or so I believed. Growing up in the Foster house was like being cast in a play where everyone else knew their lines. My mother, Margaret, built a jewelry empire she paraded at every gala. Evelyn, my elder sister, thrived as a corporate lawyer with a smile sharper than her contracts. Claire, the youngest, turned into a celebrated designer whose work sparkled across glossy magazines. And me? The son who chose sheet music over stock reports. The one who'd rather tune clarinets on Saturday mornings than sip cocktails at the country club. The family disappointment. My father, Richard, died when I was 15, slumped at his desk with tax papers spread like fallen leaves. He was quiet, fading year by year under my mother's shadow. After him came Uncle Henry, loud, imposing, filling every room as if silence owed him rent. The trunk haunted me since childhood, sitting in the back of her closet like a secret. Once at 13, I tried to pry it open with a bobby pin. She caught me. No shouting, no punishment, just silence. 30 long days where she looked straight through me. That silence taught me to bury questions. But now Margaret was gone. The funeral was a spectacle. Walls of white lilies, speeches that painted her as a saint, the governor himself in attendance. My sisters wept picture-perfect tears, and I, the forgotten son, went home with the one thing they didn't want, her locked trunk, and inside, the letters that told me my entire life was built on a lie. I sat between them, feeling nothing but a hollow ache, like mourning someone I'd never really known. The whole reading should have been closure, but instead it cracked something open. Uncle Henry couldn't stop shifting in his seat. Mr. Whitfield, the lawyer, stumbled over my part like the words burned his tongue. And my sisters, Evelyn and Claire, traded quick glances, the kind that said they already knew how badly I was about to be cut out. That's how I ended up in Margaret's bedroom with a crowbar, staring down the old trunk she'd guarded all my life. I expected yellowed photographs, maybe a stack of my father's letters, or nothing but moth-eaten clothes. I didn't expect a stack of envelopes that would tear my identity apart. The first one was enough to knock me to my knees. Dear Daniel, if you're reading this, Margaret is gone. It's time you knew the truth. She took you from us when you were 5. For 37 years, I believed I belonged to the Foster family. Growing up in that Greenwich mansion was like living in a museum where every piece had a story, except me. 14 rooms filled with Persian rugs, gilded frames, and polished antiques. The kind of home that whispered old money even though Margaret had built it herself. Everything had a purpose. Everything except me. My earliest memory is from when I was 6, sitting stiff in a high-back chair at the dining table while Margaret drilled Evelyn on multiplication. Excellence is not optional, she said, nails clicking against mahogany. Evelyn rattled off the answers without missing a beat. Then she turned to me. Daniel, what's 8 times 7? 52, I muttered, and the silence that followed was heavier than any slap. It's 56, she said at last, lips pressed thin. Evelyn knew that when she was 5. That single moment became the rhythm of my childhood. Her triumphs, my failures. Evelyn was destined for courtrooms and power. She soared through Yale and made partner before 35. At dinners, Margaret paraded her victories like scripture, demanding we all listen. Claire, meanwhile, was the artist. She could sketch roses before she'd learned cursive, and by 12 her jewelry designs were already being sold in the stores. She understands beauty, Margaret would say, her hands soft on Claire's hair, pride shining in her eyes. And me? I found music by accident at 10, when school forced us to take a class. The piano keys felt like a language I already knew. My teacher begged my parents to let me take lessons. Margaret laughed at the idea. The boy can't manage basic math, and you want to waste money on scales. But my father, Richard, quietly pressed for it. She relented on the condition I kept straight B's. I did, barely, and the lessons stretched on long enough to earn me a scholarship to a modest state college. The day I announced I wanted to be a music teacher, you'd have thought I confessed to a crime. It was Thanksgiving, my junior year. The table was packed with relatives, business partners, and Uncle Henry booming at the head of the table. A teacher, Margaret repeated, her fork hovering midair. It's what I love, I said. I'm good with kids. The silence that followed felt colder than winter, the same silence that had shadowed me my whole life. Only now, years later, I understood it for what it really was. It wasn't disappointment. It was guilt, because I was never hers to begin with. I can make a difference, I said, my voice steady. Evelyn nearly choked on her wine. You can make a difference selling $1,000,000 necklaces, too, with better profit margins. Uncle Henry leaned back, his booming laugh shaking the chandelier. Daniel, be serious. Men in this family run businesses. They don't waste time teaching kids to plunk out Mary Had a Little Lamb. Only my father stayed quiet, poking at his dinner. Later that night, I found him in his study, hunched over ledgers. Without looking up, he murmured, "Follow your heart, son." God knows I didn't. 6 months later, he was gone. The trunk had been there through all of it. During college breaks, I'd catch Margaret in her closet, staring at it as though it might speak. Once, after my father's funeral, I saw her with her hand resting on the lock, tears streaming down her face, the only time I ever saw her cry. "Mother," I whispered from the doorway. She spun around, scrubbing her cheeks, her mask sliding back into place. "Privacy, Daniel. Learn to respect it." So I did. I built my own life, teaching music at Jefferson Middle School. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Kids lit up when they conquered a tricky piece. Parents cried at concerts. I made $60,000 a year and lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment 40 minutes from her mansion. To Margaret, it might as well have been poverty. At gatherings, she introduced her children with the same cadence every time. "These are my daughters, Evelyn, a partner at Whitman and Howe, and Claire, a world-renowned designer." Then, almost as an afterthought, "And this is Daniel. He teaches." The will was read 3 days after her funeral, inside Uncle Henry's downtown office, a shrine to money and power with marble floors and leather chairs that cost more than my car. Mr. Whitfield, our lawyer for decades, shuffled papers behind the massive oak desk, his expression as crisp as his suit. Evelyn swept in wearing a black Mercedes and a suit worth more than my yearly rent. Claire arrived separately in a Range Rover, layered in her own jewelry, each piece a small fortune. I drove my 8-year-old Honda Civic, circling the block twice to avoid the garage fee. "Before we begin," Mr. Whitfield said, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses, "your mother left explicit instructions. Every detail accounted for. The small bequest came first. Marion, the housekeeper of 20 years, received $50,000. Several charities got large donations. Her first edition books went to Yale. Every line precise, every gift intentional. To my eldest daughter, Evelyn Margaret Foster, Whitfield read, I leave the flagship stores in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, along with the Burmese rubies, the Cartier diamond set, and $4 million in liquid assets. Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. She'd been running those stores already. To my youngest daughter, Claire Elizabeth Foster, I leave the international branches in Paris, Milan, and Tokyo, the vintage jewelry collection from 1890 to 1950, the workshop, all design patents, and $3.5 million in liquid assets. Claire smiled, eyes bright with calculation. And to my son, Daniel Richard Foster, Whitfield's voice faltered. He cleared his throat. I leave the contents of the trunk in my bedroom closet, to be opened only after my passing. The silence was crushing. Heat burned my face as Evelyn burst into laughter, not even pretending to hold back. That's it? The famous trunk? Oh, Daniel, maybe it's full of pirate gold. Or Mother's secret diary, where she admits you were secretly her favorite. Evelyn, Uncle Henry said sharply, though his smirk betrayed him. Claire didn't laugh. She looked at me instead, her expression unreadable, almost guilty. Maybe there's something valuable inside, Daniel. You know how Mother loved her secrets. Evelyn's tone was syrupy, but her smirk gave her away. Mr. Whitfield didn't pause. He moved on to the properties. The Greenwich Mansion went to Evelyn. The Martha's Vineyard Beach House went to Claire. The Manhattan apartment was to be sold, proceeds divided between my sisters. My name was never mentioned again. Is there anything else? I asked, my voice hollow, unfamiliar. Did she say why? Whitfield hesitated, shuffling papers with a nervous precision. There is a letter addressed to you. He handed me a cream-colored envelope, my name written in Margaret's flawless script. I tore it open. The words were short, sharp, and final. Daniel, the trunk contains what you deserve. No more, no less. You chose your path, ignoring what it meant to be a foster. Your sisters understood. You never did. Perhaps what you find inside will teach you the lesson you refuse to learn. Some things are more valuable than money, and some truths are better left buried. Cryptic to the end, Evelyn muttered, rising to her feet. She smoothed her skirt with a careless flick. Well, I've got stores to run. Daniel, do let us know if you find anything interesting in your grand prize. Maybe Father's tax returns or Mother's moth-eaten gowns. She swept out, Claire close behind. Uncle Henry stayed. He stood at the window, shoulders heavier than I'd ever seen them. Your mother had her reasons, he said at last. Did she ever tell you what was in it? He turned, and for the first time in my life, I saw guilt clouding his eyes. Go open it, Daniel. But prepare yourself. Margaret never did anything without purpose. The drive to the mansion felt like a funeral procession for my dignity. The estate was already being stripped for Evelyn's move-in. Sheets covered furniture, boxes lined the halls, and the air felt hollow. The trunk sat where it always had, in the back of Margaret's closet. For years it had been a symbol of her power. Now it looked small, almost pathetic. I fetched a crowbar from the garage, my hand shaking. 37 years of being told I wasn't enough. I whispered to the empty room. And this is your last joke. The lock gave way with a crack that echoed through the silence. I yanked the lid open, ready for dust, for useless trinkets. Instead, I froze. Neatly bundled stacks of letters filled the trunk, tied with string, organized by year. Hundreds of them, all addressed to me, all unopened. Every envelope carried the same return address. A and D. Brennan, 4827, Sycamore Street, Riverside. I sank to the floor, my legs refusing to hold me. The first bundle was labeled, age 5 to 6. The handwriting wasn't Margaret's. My fingers shook as I slid out the first letter, postmarked 2 weeks after my 5th birthday. The paper was yellowed, but perfectly preserved. Dear Daniel, happy 5th birthday, sweet boy. We pray this letter finds you, though we fear it won't. Margaret Foster has no right to keep you. You were taken from us, and we've been fighting to bring you home ever since. Your real name, is Daniel Brennan. I am your mother, Anita, and you have a brother, David, who cries for you every night. We won't stop searching. We won't stop loving you." The room tilted. My heart hammered in my ears. I tore open another, dated 6 months later. "Daniel." The judge refused to hear me. Margaret's lawyers told him I was delusional, that I never had a son. "But I have your birth certificate, your baby pictures, the blanket with little elephants you wouldn't sleep without. How can they say you don't exist when my arms still ache for you? David asks about you every day." The letters slipped from my hands. Everything I thought I knew, every memory, every sacrifice, every moment, shattered. Margaret hadn't just raised me in shadows of disappointment. She had stolen me from the very people who never stopped waiting. He was 7 now, and he still wouldn't let me box up your toys. He insists you'll come home, that you'll walk through the door any day. Letter after letter told a story I couldn't believe. According to Anita Brennan, I wasn't Daniel Foster at all. I had been born Daniel Brennan, her son with Richard Foster, the same Richard I call my father, the man who'd collapsed at his desk when I was 15. But in her version, Richard hadn't been married to Margaret when I was born. He had been with Anita, his secretary. One letter, written when I was 10, nearly split me open. "Daniel, the investigator found you. We saw you at your school concert. You played the piano so beautifully, I cried through the entire performance. We sat as close as the restraining order would let us, 500 feet. That's all the law says I'm allowed from my own son. At one point you looked right at us, and I wanted to scream, 'I'm your mother. That's your brother.' But the police were there. Margaret made sure of that. Between the bundles of letters were legal documents, custody petitions dismissed without hearing, restraining orders Margaret filed against Anita, calling her delusional. A lab report showed a 99.9% DNA match between me, samples collected from a discarded cup, and Anita Brennan. There were photographs, too. Me at Little League. Me at graduation. Me teaching at Jefferson Middle School just last year. All taken from a distance, like I was some fugitive. When I was 25, Anita explained everything in a letter I'd never seen until now. "The truth is brutal, Daniel. Margaret knew I was pregnant with Richard's child. She couldn't have children of her own. The daughters she claimed were his were from her affairs. But Richard stayed, because he was weak and because she owned him. When you were 5, she set her trap. She invited me to Lake Tahoe, pretending she wanted peace. She had me drugged, staged a breakdown, had me committed for 72 hours. By the time I got out, she had already filed papers claiming you as her son. Judges owed her favors. Lawyers bent to her money. I had nothing but the truth. And in this country, truth without power is nothing." The most recent letter was only a month old. "Daniel, I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. Weeks, maybe days. I won't live to see Margaret's end, but her brother Henry told us she planned to leave you the trunk. If you're reading this, you finally know. Your brother Damon never married, never had children. He couldn't. He said his family was broken too badly. We still live at 4827 Sycamore Street, the same house we bought when you were 3, the one with the backyard where we dreamed of putting a swing set. Please, if there's any part of you that still wonders about us, come home. Let me see my son, just once, not through a camera lens." The letters lay scattered on the floor around me like evidence in a trial no one had ever heard. 37 years stolen. A stolen name. A stolen life. I looked into the mirror on Margaret's vanity. I didn't recognize the man staring back. Who was I? Daniel Foster, the failure? Or Daniel Brennan, the stolen child? There was only one way to find out. I grabbed the last letter, the one with the address, and my car keys. Riverside was 3 hours away. 3 hours to decide whether to chase a truth that could shatter everything I knew, or to turn back and pretend I'd never opened that trunk. I started the engine. The house on Sycamore Street was nothing like the mansion I grew up in. A modest 2-story with blue shutters. Roses in bloom across the yard. A wooden swing hung from the oak tree out front. The kind I'd begged for as a child, the kind Margaret had dismissed as too common. And for the first time in my life, I realized that maybe I'd been born for this house, not hers. My hands trembled as I pressed the doorbell. It was nearly 9:30 at night. The door creaked open, and I found myself staring at a man who could have been me in another life. Same brown eyes, same crooked nose, but he was broader, stronger, with the kind of frame that came from real work. His face collapsed the moment he saw me. Daniel. The word barely made it past his lips. I found the letters. He didn't hesitate. Damon pulled me into his arms, holding me with a force that felt like coming home from a war I didn't know I'd been fighting. He smelled of sawdust and coffee, and tears ran freely down his face, unashamed, the kind of tears no man in the foster house had ever been allowed to shed. "My God, you're here. You're actually here," he kept saying, pulling back to look at me, then hugging me again as if afraid I'd vanish. He led me into a living room that hit like a punch. Every wall was covered in photographs. Me at every age, each image taken from a distance. Me at 8, swinging a bat on a dusty little league field. Me at 12, accepting a music award. Me at 16, shoulders stiff at Richard's funeral. My high school graduation. College. Even one from last spring, conducting the Jefferson Middle School band. We never missed what we could find out about, Damon said, following my stunned gaze. Mom hired private investigators for years. When the money ran out, we did it ourselves. I learned photography just so I could capture you, even from far away. Where is she? My voice cracked. Where's Anita? Where's our mother? Damon's face fell. He sank into a worn leather couch, motioning for me to sit. She passed 2 weeks ago. She held on as long as she could, waiting for Henry to do the right thing. The day before she died, he finally called, told us about the trunk, about Margaret's will. Mom smiled for the first time in months. "He'll find them," she said. "He'll find the letters, and he'll come home." The grief hit like a hammer. I've been robbed her twice, once at 5 years old, and again just 2 weeks ago. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice raw. Damon rose, walked to a battered filing cabinet, and pulled out folders bulging with documents, photos, newspaper clippings. He spread them across the coffee table like evidence in a trial that had never been allowed to happen. "Dad, Richard, wasn't married to Margaret when you were born," Damon began. "They worked at the same accounting firm. She was in client relations. Mom was his secretary. They fell in love. Real love. Not the deal he made later with Margaret. You were born in 1982. Dad was planning to marry Mom. But Margaret," his jaw clenched. "Margaret wanted him, and she wanted the foster money." He slid a birth certificate across the table. "Daniel James Brennan. Born March 15th, 1982. Parents, Richard Foster and Anita Brennan. She couldn't have kids, though she lied about it for years. When she learned about you, about us, she played nice, pretended to accept things, even offered to help Dad break the news to his family. That vacation to Lake Tahoe, it was supposed to be when we'd finally be recognized." He pulled out a police report from 1987. "Instead, she had Mom drugged at dinner. While she was unconscious, Margaret took you. She already had forged papers ready, fake adoption records, a birth certificate claiming you were hers. By the time Mom woke up in the hospital 3 days later, Margaret had a restraining order in place, claiming Mom was a disturbed ex-employee obsessed with her family." I held up one of the lab reports from the trunk. "But the DNA tests. We did 5 of them over the years," Damon said bitterly. "Every time we tried to bring them to court, her lawyers cried fraud, contamination, tampering. Judges were bought. She had senators and governors on speed dial. We were nothing. She was Margaret Foster, queen of her empire." He pulled out older photos, ones I'd never seen. A baby swaddled in a blue blanket, a toddler chasing a ball, a small boy with a gap-toothed smile I didn't recognize as myself. In every picture, I was with Anita, her eyes warm, her smile identical to mine. Or with Damon, just a child himself, already protective, his arm wrapped around his little brother. For the first time, I saw the life I was supposed to have, and it had been stolen before I even knew it was mine. The empire, everyone praised Margaret for creating, hadn't sprung from her genius. It had been funded with Richard's inheritance, money that should have gone to Anita and me. Evelyn and Claire weren't even Richard's daughters. Margaret's affairs had produced them, but he stayed, believing he was holding the family together for my sake, never realizing I was the only piece of truth in her world of lies. How did Henry know all this? I asked. Damon's jaw tightened. Because he helped her. He was the one who vouched for her story. He swore in court that you'd always been Margaret's child. Without his testimony, she never could have pulled it off. A cold anger spread through me, and then he lived with it for nearly 4 decades. Guilt eats people alive, Damon said quietly. About 10 years ago, he started sending us money, small amounts, 500 here, 1,000 there. Enough to remind us he hadn't forgotten. And when Margaret got sick, he called, told us to wait, that the truth would finally come out. I picked up a photograph of Anita cradling me as a baby, both of us laughing at something just out of frame. She had died thinking I would never know. She had died without ever hearing me call her mom. The next morning, Henry showed up at the house on Sycamore Street. He looked older than his years, weighed down by guilt he couldn't shake. Damon opened the door, but didn't step aside, forcing Henry to speak from the porch like the outsider he was. I know you hate me, Henry began, his voice cracked and thin. I helped her. I thought I was protecting the family name, protecting Richard from scandal. I vouched for her lies. I watched you grow up under her roof, knowing the truth, and I said nothing. I stepped up beside Damon, my fury barely contained. You watched her break me for 37 years. You knew I had a mother fighting to reach me, and you let her die unheard. I tried, Henry said weakly. The money. Blood money, Damon spat. You think $500 here and there fixes a life stolen? Our mother died with an ache that never left her chest. Henry's hand shook as he pulled out a thick envelope. This is everything. My sworn affidavit. Documents I saved. Recordings of Margaret near the end, doped up but confessing. It's enough to destroy her legacy, to prove who you are, maybe even overturn the will. I took the envelope, its weight almost crushing. Why now? His eyes filled with shame. Because Anita called me before she passed. She didn't beg for herself. She begged me to tell you the truth. She said she could finally let go if she knew you'd learn who you were. I couldn't ignore that. The battle that followed ripped through the headlines. Jewelry heiress built empire on kidnapped child. Evelyn and Claire fought back, hiring the best attorneys money could buy. But when Henry's affidavit went public, when the DNA tests were validated, when Margaret's forgeries were laid bare, their case crumbled. Within 6 months, the empire dissolved. Every store, every asset, every piece was liquidated. The courts awarded me everything, as Richard's only biological child and as restitution for a lifetime stolen. $16 million, they said, though no sum could repay what had been taken. I gave Evelyn and Claire $1 million each. They weren't responsible for Margaret's crimes, even if they had lived off the spoils. They were victims, too, raised by a woman who had never known how to love. Evelyn fled to London to escape the scandal. Claire stayed. To my surprise, we've slowly built something resembling family. But the Betrayal inheritance came a week later, when Damon handed me a box Anita had kept. Inside were birthday cards she'd bought, but never mailed. Cassette tapes of her voice, telling me about my first steps, my favorite toys, the lullabies she sang, and a baby blanket with little elephants on it, worn soft from being held every night for 37 years. That blanket was worth more than any fortune. It was proof I had been loved all along. I moved to Riverside for good. Damon and I rebuilt our mother's house side by side, sanding floors, painting walls, discovering pieces of each other with every room we restored. He was an architect, designing homes with space for children to laugh and grow, but he admitted he'd never married. I couldn't imagine building a family when ours was torn apart. He said one evening as we sat on the porch, Anita had always hoped her sons would share. Then he smiled. But it's not broken anymore. I stayed a teacher, only now at Riverside Elementary. I started a music program for kids who couldn't afford lessons, children who might have gone their whole lives without knowing they had a voice worth hearing. I called it the Anita Brennan Music Foundation. At every concert, I tell the audience it's named for my mother, a woman who never stopped fighting for what she loved. 6 months after the truth came out, I found myself standing between two graves. To my left, Margaret Foster's towering marble monument, already fading as fewer and fewer came to visit. To my right, Anita Brennan's simple stone. The words carved into it read, "Beloved Mother, never stop fighting. Finally won." I set roses from her own garden at her grave and whispered, "I'm home, Mom. I'm finally home." Some prisons have bars. Others are built from lies repeated until you start to believe them. For 37 years, I lived as Daniel Foster, the son who never measured up. But the truth was I had always been Daniel Brennan, the boy who was stolen but never forgotten, the child a mother loved enough to fight for until her last breath. Margaret thought she was leaving me humiliation with that trunk, a final reminder of how little she valued me. Instead, she left me salvation. Those letters were proof of a love so fierce that death, distance, and decades of silence couldn't erase it. $16 million couldn't buy what I found inside. The truth. And the truth was priceless. The greatest inheritance isn't always wealth or property. Sometimes it's the knowledge of who you really are, where you came from, and that someone loved you enough to never give up. Anita Brennan gave me that. Now I wake each day in the home where I was meant to grow up, alongside the brother I was meant to grow with, living the life truth tried to reach me with for 37 years. I was never a disappointment. I was just lost, and now at last I'm found.